Hello, this is colleague J.N.S. and this presentation is going to be about framing reparations under an anti-genocide theoretical framework. And I situate this framework in the current Genocide Convention definition as set forth by the United Nations, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, their anti-genocide norm framing device. So SNCC used the anti-genocide norm to critique the U.S. government's hypocrisy in establishing the post-war liberal international order amid ongoing mass violence against Black Americans. So in 2022, Genocide of Black Americans continues, and it never stopped just because certain harms were made illegal, be it whether it's Jim Crow or redlining or slavery, etc. We can run a correlation and even present a corollary between present state-sanctioned genocide, racism, and reclassification to current acts of genocide being done on Black Americans today, irrespective of when the United States recognized genocide as a crime. Genocide was first recognized as a crime under international law in 1946 by the United Nations General Assembly. The International Court of Justice has repeatedly stated that the convention embodies principles that are a part of general customary international law. So in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The second element of genocide is physical, which includes the following 5 acts: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. As far as precedents for using an anti-genocide norm framing device, many states have criminalized genocide in their domestic law, and in 2021, the International Tribunal found the United States guilty of crimes against humanity. Now, the 2021 indictment against the United States of America was represented by its President, Department of State, federal and state policy agencies, and other government institutions. The main theme of that tribunal was based on a 1951 petition to the United Nations called We Still Charge Genocide. It was in recognition of the original petition of We Charge Genocide. The framing of reparations under the anti-genocide theoretical framework for Black Americans should be linear by emphasizing the institution of slavery in America as a starting point and then making a corollary from the millions who were murdered and reclassified and enslaved from 1492 to the present genocide using convention references and even sovereign law. Another emphasis should be on the U.S. constitutional law, and particularly the 13th Amendment, which promised the abolition of chattel slavery, but they put a loophole that allows the slavery of Black Americans in the 21st century via incentivizing incarceration of Black Americans who are disproportionately targeted via the school-to-prison pipeline. This racialized policy and many others are engendered by the U.S. federal and state governments. One framing device for making the case of present-day genocide is due to the racism in law. It is used as a weapon against Black Americans, making them prisoners of wars on their own land. We can make arguments for this by presenting the criminalization of legitimate political struggles of Black Americans and many other aspects of Black American life. So based on preliminary research, there are 7 elements of genocide against Black Americans that are currently falling under every definition in the Convention of Genocide as established by the United Nations. These elements are not presented in any particular order, but the first one is killing members of the group. And this is state-sanctioned violence against Black Americans as well as police brutality. So between 1980 and 2005, 9,600 Americans were killed by American police. And according to a 2016 study by The Guardian, Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely than white Americans to be killed by police. And a 2018 study found that 1 in every 1,000 Black men in America can expect to be killed by the police. And since George Floyd, we see these names and ages and locations of Black people, Black Americans, who have been killed by the police. The second element is the systematic treatment of Black Americans within society via the weaponizing of immigration and current policies around immigration as well as reclassification. So this convention reference would be a mental element with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group by deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So from 1980 through 2000, the immigrant has led to a 20 to 60% decline in wages, and 25% of that decline in employment, and about 10% of the rise in incarceration rates among Black Americans with a high school education or less. So the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics study actually concluded that immigration was responsible for roughly half the decline in real wages for native-born high school dropouts in the largest 50 metropolitan areas during the 1980s. Also, programs that were meant to benefit Black Americans specifically have been watered down and undermined because of this influx of immigration. A nearly half-century march of economic progress for Black Americans have been stifled. And for the last 200 years, we actually have data from other scholars who have shown how immigration policy harms Black Americans more than anyone else in this country. Third element is economic genocide, and the convention reference again is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Now, everyone knows about the analysis of wealth in the United States, which suggests staggering racial disparities, and that by 2053 the median wealth of Black Americans is projected to fall to zero. Current research on the racial wealth gap also shows the disparity of wealth that Black Americans have, but also Black Americans are the only American citizens that were airstriked by their government, and this is known as the Tulsa Greenwood District bombing in 1921. Other factors of economic genocide include Jim Crow era black codes with strictly limited opportunity in many southern states, as well as the racist practices of the GI Bill, the New Deal's Fair Labor Standards Act, and exemption of domestic agricultural and service occupations, as well as the predatory lending and subprime loan crisis of 2008. All of these harms still are playing out in today in terms of the racial wealth gap. The fourth element is gentrification. So American public policy systematically removes Black Americans from their homes and communities, and gentrification obviously leads to that displacement, and this makes it difficult for Black residents to afford housing in their own neighborhoods. Other components of genocide via gentrification is that Black American farmers lost 90% of their land due to the Great Migration, and the Black Americans in the Mississippi Delta in particular, they lost 12 million acres of land. And it is estimated that Black Americans lost about 20 million acres of land, with some researchers claiming that it is much more land that was stolen. Also, partition sales affect Black Americans, which means that in the southern states, you have about 40% of the Black-owned land is heirs' property, and these people, they face tremendous barriers and financial barriers to actually deriving wealth from their land. Another factor is the Torrance Act laws, which serve as loopholes that allow third parties to force Black American families off their land. Black Americans are disproportionately affected by the Torrance Act. The fifth element is medical apartheid, which is imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And there are deep public health inequities, which include elements that are both physical and mental. And Black Americans are living 8 years less than white people. And there were also forced sterilization programs in the United States, as well as food deserts, chemical contamination, and toxic stress all serve as medical apartheid. And also the Black American maternal mortality rate lends credence to how births are being prevented, because Black American women are 5 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related issues than white women. The sixth element is environmental racism. So Black Americans are exposed to far more pollutants than other Americans in their neighborhoods, explicitly because of redlining, which labeled Black Americans as an inharmonious racial group in 1934. And also the public sewage lines or water pipes in Black American neighborhoods are under repaired. Another component of environmental racism would also stem from highways and parks and infrastructure projects that destroyed Black American communities and their economic base by governmental actors. The seventh element is racial terror. The government has refused to prevent citizens who act as vigilantes and government actors from terrorizing Black Americans. The latest case being the massacre of Buffalo at that Tops on Jefferson. Buffalo is actually my hometown. I grew up in that area and I frequented that Tops growing up. And vigilantes have committed heinous acts of violence against Black Americans, and we have had no protective status given to us based off of these vigilantes. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just preliminary research, but the genocide of Black Americans is ongoing, and the correlation of the institution of slavery and past racist policies directly correlate with the 7 elements of genocide that Black Americans are facing in 2022. It never stopped. And in sovereign law, our human rights are violated via this genocide. So the very notion of crime and offense and abuse can only be derived from the state's obligation to protect and fulfill human right contents. And in sovereign law, only human rights can give the states their legitimacy. So if the state has not made a certain conduct, in this case genocide, criminal, the people can do so by calling such conduct a crime against their human rights, their super positive human rights at that. So human rights are in the super positive law, and they are inalienably linked to the individual as the basic constituents of the people. It is no coincidence that human rights appear first of all in the context of constitutions with a view to the legitimate role of the states. In human rights law, human rights are meant to establish, obligate, and control the powers of the state. Hence, it is the state that has an obligation to the people. If the state fails systematically and severely to prevent violations of human rights via genocide, then they become illegitimate. Now, we also want to consider that the state owes a debt to Black Americans under special field orders, and this order provided for the confiscation of 400,000 acres of land along the Atlantic coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, dividing it into parcels of no more than 40 acres on which it was to be settled by free Black Americans who were emancipated from slavery. In addition to framing reparations under the anti-genocide framework, the reparations package itself could be framed under sovereign human rights law and under the dignity takings and dignity restoration framework, which was created by Professor Bernadette Athune following her empirical exploration of land and disposition and restitution in South Africa. And it's a book. It's called We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Restitution Program. So again, this is just a framework, but scholars have applied many of the sociological and even legal concepts to other case studies, regardless of the time periods and in various geographic locations. So perhaps some concepts from this work could be worth exploring. It could be helpful to analyze the elements of genocide in regards to dignity and human rights restoration. And the key things that we all obviously know we should be requiring the state to give is the specificity of harm collective reparations that are lineage based, which includes direct cash payments in addition to an indefinite UBI for Black Americans only, as well as land acreage, and the removal of the exception clause in the 13th Amendment, along with the right to self-identify and be self-determined, with free education and healthcare, protected class status, tax exemption, and reinstatement of the Works Progress Administration and Federal Art Project under new guidelines and a new name specifically for Black Americans with a focus on technology, engineering, and the arts. So I'm just going to explain briefly about like where I came with this logic for this but the WPA and the Federal Arts Project was actually a New Deal program that ran from about 1935 to 1943, and it was a federal program that ran its own projects in cooperation with state and local governments. And to me, why I say that we, in addition to everything else that we asked for, I would say we need that reinstated because the WPA benefited Black Americans far beyond their exceeded proportion of the general population. So by 1935, there were 3.5 million Black Americans, men, women, and children, that were using this WPA program, which was almost 35% of the Black American population. So the 5 projects that were dedicated to these were the Federal Writers Project, the Historical Record Survey, the Federal Theater Project, the Federal Music Project and the Federal Art Project. So all of these projects need to be reinstated specifically for Black Americans, albeit with the added project for technology, machine learning, and engineering. And one of the reasons why the Historical Record Survey Project, to me, could be of productive value is because that is where many former slaves in the South were interviewed, and that's where we come up with the history of the slave narratives. These documents are of immense importance to American history, obviously, but in 2022, such a program could be repurposed to help Black Americans do their genealogy, to address reclassification, and to help preserve their lineage, culture, and bloodline. And historically, the WPA also conducted archaeological investigations which were influential in the rediscovery of the pre-Columbian American Indian cultures, and this was verbatim in their records. That's what this program was for. So it also aided in the development of professional archaeology in the United States. So again, the repurposing of even something like the Historical Record Survey Project for Black Americans could be used for the rediscovery of their various ancestors via their genealogy, and to collect their unique American history and artifacts. But again, the biggest thing that Black Americans need is a direct cash payment and land acreage. So this is just preliminary research that can be expounded on, that can be even integrated into other scholars' research or other people who are doing this work. I want to thank you guys for listening.